Welcome to ChristiTutionalist Politics podcast, aka CTP, in association with thelibertybeacon.com. And I am your host, Joseph M. Lenard, and that's Lenard. CTP is your no muss, no fuss, just me, you, and occasional guest type podcast. I really appreciate you tuning in. As Graham Norton would say, let's get on with the show. All righty, folks. Welcome to another midweek, mid-month special drop of ChristiTutionalist Politics. As most of you know, I am the author of Terror Strikes Coming Soon to a City Near You, a Christian book, but obviously not your normal fluffy kind of traditional Christian book when the main subject matter deals with terrorism, but a Christian book nonetheless, and it is in part dedicated to first responders. So we're going to bring somebody on who's very familiar with first responder issues. Please welcome to the show, and I'm not the first to joke, for those of you to remember the old artist Rico Suave, to call him Clive Savacool, but it's Savacool, Savacool. Welcome to the show, Clive.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you coming on. Give us your general background. Let's start there.
So ADHD kid, never could sit still, and so right out of high school, I was looking for something that would grab my attention. I didn't do great in school because I couldn't pay attention, but became a firefighter because I figured something new every day, and I enjoyed being athletic. And then through just the way my career progressed in a busy department near San Francisco, I kind of got the entrepreneur bug and ended up founding 2 different startups. And so my career kind of excelled in both aspects. I became a fire chief up at South Lake Tahoe and in Garden Valley Fire District. And then I now CEO of my startup, LogRx.
So you started off in California. Are you in California again now?
I am. I've actually lived in California my whole life.
Okay. Well, Tahoe is both Nevada and California, right? Yeah. I was in a park in Nevada at one time, and wow, man, those roads are narrow, and in the winter, that snow, you got nowhere to put it. It's stacked taller than the houses. I bet that's a challenge in the winter, getting through there.
Oh man, in 2021, we shut down 50 and 80, and nobody could get out of Tahoe during, it was like Christmas week or right before Christmas, something like that. No, right after Christmas in 2021, we actually had to shut down all the highways. People were just trapped.
Oh boy. So
that was crazy.
Did they have a little bit of a warning to stock up on things, or?
A little bit, but human nature, especially in America, we think somebody else will fix it for us. And so we ended up opening up a warming shelter at a rec center. And so we did everything we could. But one of the challenges, not to dive too deep, is they shut down Interstate 80 first. So there's 2 ways from Nevada to California, Highway 80 and Highway 50. So they shut down 80. So everyone in Reno decided they're going to go through Tahoe to get back to the Bay Area, San Francisco. And so everybody came through South Lake Tahoe, and then they shut down 50. And so we had, no exaggeration, miles and miles and miles of cars just stopped for like 10 hours. And in fact, it ended up being overnight, and it was crazy. Yeah, we opened up our emergency operations center.
Yeah, so it wasn't so much the Tahoe people who know how to deal with it. It was others that landed up trapped there.
Yeah, and it was literally the day after Christmas that it started. And so people were leaving from holiday travel, and they just all got stuck in South Lake Tahoe. Quite the adventure.
Wow. Now, you were a fire chief there for a while. You said, how long were you there as fire chief?
I was a fire chief at South Lake Tahoe for 2 years, got them through the pandemic, the wildfires, and so on. And then before that, as a fire chief at Garden Valley Fire District, which is pretty close to South Lake Tahoe.
Yeah.
But I was there 4 years.
You mentioned wildfires. That's a major concern of mine because we're not managing our land like we used to. There's no fire breaks anymore. We're not clearing brush like we used to. And people are amazed that we're burning more acreage. It just is unfathomable to me that you don't take care of things and you're surprised that it goes to pot.
Yeah, that, and then with the different climate, we're having drier fuels, warmer summers, and then higher winds. And so everything is going towards bigger wildfires than going away from it. So it's kind of the recipe for the perfect wildfire storm, which is why nobody can get fire insurance in California right now.
All right, before we get to your startups, I saw in your profile, I've got it printed out here. He also has a passion for motorcycle racing and won an American Federation of Motorcyclists Championship in 2019. He now helps coach and mentor up-and-coming racers. I had an old Suzuki Gixxer 600, but racing, no thanks. Although I did have that bike up to 116 on a freeway once. Don't recommend it. Very dumb, very stupid, but I did it. Tell us a little bit about your, again, kind of, you go back to your ADHD and kind of an adrenaline junkie streak.
Yeah, for me, I think it was the competition and the doing something different and the challenge. I was raised by my uncle who raced motorcycles. He raced cars, and he was done by the time I came around. But he got me into kart racing. He said, if you save up the money to buy a racing cart, I'll take you to the track. And so I mowed lawns for 2 years, saving up $1,500 to get my first go-kart in the early 90s, racing go-kart. And so he took me, I raced several years, won a championship racing karts. And then once I became an adult and could afford, I got a race car, and then progressed to where I was racing Formula Mazdas, which is pretty high level, and did well there. But it was just so expensive, and I ended up getting a motorcycle when I was like 26, just because it seemed like a good idea at the time. And of course, my brain's like, well, let's take this to the racetrack. And so I went to the racetrack. I was like, man, this is more fun and cheaper and more my crowd. And so I gave up car racing and got into motorcycles. And I tell my wife it's my meditation. That's my time to go and just get everything out of my head, go and enjoy my friends. Not that my wife isn't my best friend, but I go to the track to just relax.
Careful, get yourself in trouble there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I gave up motorcycles 3 years ago after a bad wreck, and so she wasn't too happy when I got another motorcycle last year. But couldn't stay away.
You're riding, but not racing.
I did one race last summer and kind of decided, you know what, I'm just not into it like I used to. So now I just go to the track to ride and coach and enjoy myself.
And I could kind of understand that. My former father-in-law did drag, the racing, not the dressing. But can never pass on the bad joke. So yeah, that expensive, dangerous hobby. The family wasn't too keen on him doing that. Not only the expense, but indeed the danger. I mean, those things light up in a hurry. So, but I can get the feel for, like I said, to be on a motorcycle at 100 miles an hour is quite a feeling.
Yeah, and it's strange. It's kind of one of those things where you get used to it. You get used to the speed. Your brain kind of processes things at that greater speed, and so you don't feel like you're going fast. It's like a sport, and you're just focused on my brake marker, my turn-in marker, my body position, until something goes wrong. And then all of a sudden it comes a realization like, holy cow, I'm going to go off the track. I'm going 150. Slow down as fast as I can. Once I get to the dirt, just use the rear brake. If I have to, low side and just tumble. So I think it's one of those things where until something goes wrong, the speed doesn't always comprehend.
Yeah. I also had cousins while younger that were into motocross. So well familiar with the motorcycle racing. But back to the first responders. Do you have, I don't want to get too deep or too dark, or do you have a time in your career where you were in a place that you felt like that might come all to an end for you, let alone those you're there trying to save?
You mean a situation where I thought might get killed?
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And oftentimes, and probably a lot of cops, firefighters, and soldiers could probably see the similarity is usually it's afterwards. Usually it's right afterwards. You're like, wow, I didn't think about how close that was.
You were
Especially,
caught up in the moment, the training and adrenaline is going.
yeah. Well, and there's a weird mental process that I think first responders and soldiers have, where you go into a situation, you assess it, you determine what needs to be done, you look at what resources you have, and then you're like, okay, here's the plan, let's execute. And your brain is just do this. If your variable comes your way, you adjust, you come up with another plan, and you just go with it. And so I think the situations I've been in where I thought, wow, this is pretty hairy, your brain just reassesses and you go, okay, do this. And so it's almost like you're not, I don't want to say not, you don't have like an emotional state. You're more just, here's the mission, let's knock it out. And that's why once that stops, your brain is like, wow, that's a little sketchy. I do remember one particular apartment fire years ago. I was a captain. It's a downstairs, a garden style apartment, which is basically where the door is outside. It's not the center hallway. We went inside, it was fully involved, and my firefighter said it was too hot, so he got behind me. I took the nozzle, and we're pushing the fire, and it's 125 gallon a minute with the nozzle, and the fire just wasn't getting knocked down. And so my brain, because I'd been in countless fires at that point, it was like, something's not right. There's something not right. This fire should be going out. And so I said, back out, back out. So we get out the front door. I took a look at the structure. I asked the incident commander, hey, is there anything going on the structure? And he said, no. So we went back inside, and come to find out what happened was there was a divider in this apartment where we were pushing the fire and it was coming around on top of us. And so I just had this feeling like my brain is saying this isn't the way the fire should be behaving with what we're doing.
Right.
And so that's the only time I can remember where I was like, something's not right. I can't figure out what it is. We need to get out right now.
Right. Because saving property is one thing, but the first and foremost is to protect life.
Yeah. And honestly, that was like 6 months after 2 guys in my station got killed in a house fire. And so that was fresh in my brain towards like, okay, they knew what they're doing. They died. So I started second guessing also, am I seeing everything? And so that definitely set me back in confidence.
Right.
But that was kind of one of those moments.
Yeah, because no matter how much you train, you can't know until any given situation is going to be different. Right. And that's
Right.
one of the main reasons why I wanted to have you on, dedicating my book to first responders. People think, obviously, police have their lives on the line, but I don't think they realize how often, anytime that EMT even goes out, they don't know what situation they're getting into either, and their life could even be at risk.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in fact, sometimes good luck reinforces bad habits. And so a lot of times you'll go into a situation so many times that you feel like, okay, I haven't gotten hurt in the past, so I'm going to be fine this time. I actually had some challenges when I was at South Lake Tahoe with one of my battalion chiefs, because he would make decisions that were going to get the guys hurt. And I'd tell him like, hey, you doing this is unsafe. And you say, well, nothing happened. It's like, well, in hindsight, it's easy to say I drove to LA without wearing a seatbelt and I never got hurt. Well, if you got in a crash, you would have died. So kind of that learned behavior of good luck can be to a detriment. And so that's why it's important for first responders to always be on top of their training.
Yeah, and most cops, firefighters, EMTs are younger people, and you're more in shape at that age and able to do things. And also, though, at that age, we still haven't learned that we're not invincible thing yet.
Right.
So tell us about your startups, Exposure Tracker and LogRx.
Yeah, so Exposure Tracker was kind of my first real jump into being an entrepreneur. I consulted for a startup before that, which actually is what kind of gave me the bug to do it myself. And so being just a firefighter, and that's my only background, I didn't really know what I was doing, to be honest. I just had some ideas. And so fortunately, I found a co-founder and we got some developers to help us build it. But I had some challenges with exposures myself as a firefighter and actually got some permanent lung damage from being a firefighter. And so I wanted to, okay, how can I prevent this from happening to others? What can I do to improve the industry as a whole? And some other programs had come up with kind of tracking exposures, but they just executed horribly. Like it was just never, ever adopted.
So let's define exposure first for everybody.
Yeah, so every time a firefighter goes to a fire, there's some level of exposure, even if you wear a mask. And that's the first question people ask is, well, don't you wear a mask? It's like, well, you do once you get to the front door. But everything in between, you're inhaling and everything. And when you're inside of a fire, that smoke and carcinogens, everything's being baked into your skin, literally. And so you come back from a fire, you take a shower, and then like I'd go home the next day and my girlfriend would be like, hey, you smell like smoke. And like, well, that was 24 hours ago and 2 showers ago. So it's because you're off gassing. So all of those carcinogens are in your body every time you go to a fire. And so what we wanted to do was track how often that's occurring. We also wanted to track communicable disease exposure. So when people get exposed like hepatitis C or something like that on an emergency, they need to track that. So if it progresses down the road, there's complete records. And then also like hazardous materials. So there's all kinds of things that we wanted to track for firefighters, given the hazards in the industry. And then eventually build in kind of AI to where you can identify, okay, if you've had this many exposures in this amount of time, you now need 6 months of no exposures, because that's how the body recovers. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of how we designed it.
Interesting. And the LogRx?
LogRx was something I started while I was a fire chief at Garden Valley Fire, as kind of an idea, because I was looking for a way to track narcotics, because paramedics, they all carry some form of narcotic for pain relief and other treatments for patients. And the drugs are tracked on pen and paper. And these are lethal drugs. I mean, how many people die every year in the United States from opioid overdose? And so I figured this is very careless, this is negligent in my mind. And so there's got to be a better way, and I couldn't find anything out there. And so my brain's like, I bet I could come up with a better process for doing this. And so I started building it on the side while I was a fire chief. And then in 2021, it started getting some good enough traction to where I basically had to decide, do I want to keep going as CEO with LogRx or be a fire chief? Because I can no longer do both.
Yeah, you were trying to juggle too many things, huh? I would imagine both were very demanding.
Yeah, and stressful, especially the fire chief part, because it was during a challenging time in Tahoe.
Yeah, at that point, then you're not only worried about yourself, you're responsible for how many? How many people were you responsible for at that point?
Well, 40 members of the department, but then you figure a city of 20-something thousand. I worked very close with the city manager, great guy. And so we would work on citywide issues together. It was during the pandemic. I was organizing vaccine clinics. We had massive wildfires, snowstorms. I mean, you name it, we dealt with it in 2021 or 2020 through 2022 when I was there. And so I would come home and just kind of vent to my wife about all the challenges I'm dealing with. And then at the same time, I'd get an inquiry for LogRx from some companies like, hey, this is great. Can we use it? You know, who do we send the check to? And so one piece, I've got stress. Another part, I've got this huge opportunity to change the world and to make this amazing, amazing business. And so it's like, boy, my own lifespan would be much longer if I go with the startup.
Uh-huh. And I also see in your profile that there's a topic you can discuss near and dear to me as a ChristiTutionalist limited government guy, running a government agency like a business, unlike some of these places that run like their own personal fiefdom.
Yeah. So that was something that I think kind of came about when I first got my first fire chief job. And that was because I had taken some time off from being a battalion chief, being in the fire service. I left for 2 years to do exposure tracker, and it kind of rewired my brain on being fiscally responsible.
The waste, the fraud, any abuse in the system, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure anybody in government can recognize that old saying, especially in the militaries like this, where they say, if you don't spend it this year, you're going to lose it for next year. And so whatever's been allocated, you have to spend all that and then ask for a little bit more, just so they don't think you don't need that much next year. And that would drive me nuts as a fire chief when one of my chief officers would come to me and say, hey, we got to spend this fiscal year's coming up. It's like, no, we don't need to spend it. We can give that back to the city manager, and then we can ask for it in other areas. Because if he trusts me, he's going to give us money that we actually need. And it would just drive me nuts. And so being a startup founder, I was able to then bring that back, and along with some other aspects, accountability. In government, it can be challenging. A lot of people go into government because it's a very secure job. It's easy to slack off if you want to without consequence. Whereas in a startup, if you have anybody not carrying their weight, everybody else has to carry it. And that might be the failure of the business. Everybody has to be working to improve.
Yeah. Government, I sure hope less so in your area of government and what you're doing, but other areas, rubber rooms and people who are literally they're just coasting through life, still collecting paychecks. You can't have that in life and death situations like you're dealing with.
No, you can't. And so I'd say as a whole, firefighters, they want to help people. They get it for the right reasons. They do a good job. But just out of sheer numbers, you are going to get human nature. You're going to get some people that are a challenge. And there's something in California called the Firefighter Bill of Rights. And there's also the Police Officer Bill of Rights, which actually extends a lot more rights for the employee than other employees, government employees. And so without going into detail, it's very, very, very hard to discipline a firefighter in California, and terminating them is near impossible.
And that's sad all through government, because you get somebody who sees they can get away with something, then they'll try to get away with more. And as you said, causing others to have to do more. It's bad for unit cohesion.
Yes, exactly, because those people are a very, very small minority. And sadly, looking back, the firefighters that I personally terminated, and then from other ones I've seen in the departments, all of them got their job back under appeal. And so those gave a poor representation for the majority of the group that works very, very hard, and dedicated staff. But anyway, that's still important. In fact, I remember one time I had the city attorney tell me, if you fire him, he might get his job back under these reasons and appeal. And I said, I don't care. I want to be able to stand up and say I did the right thing.
Yeah.
And because of this behavior, he should not be a firefighter. And so I said, if somebody else wants to give him his job back, that's not on me. I'm going to do the right thing.
Right.
And so we did terminate him. But I would say that sends a message to the rest of the organization that it's like there is accountability, and other firefighters most firefighters that care about their job, that care about how the department looks, they actually appreciate it when they see someone else who's not towing the line be held accountable. And not just like termination. The role of discipline is to change behavior, is to bring them up to speed. And so that aspect actually helps build up the culture. The hard part is when you go into an organization as like a new fire chief and the culture is one of no accountability, then you look like stepdad coming in and disciplining people for things, for the kids, for stuff that they've never been disciplined for. And they're like, hey, what's up with stepdad? We always got away with doing this.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge, but that's something I learned on the startup side is you have to have a high level of accountability, and especially for yourself, because if you don't, the startup's going to fail. And then I guess some other challenges or aspects that I brought over is don't be held back by bureaucracies. You know, the government is known for bureaucracies, but as a fire chief, I found if you keep pushing, you find ways around it, you can get past those bureaucracies. Because eventually the people that are pushing to reinforce bureaucracies will give up. And so I always had in my mind, I'm never going to not succeed because of a bureaucracy. I'm going to push. Unfortunately, I had a city manager in Tahoe that supported me. And in the 2 years I was there, I don't think the guy ever told me no when I came up with an idea. So that's very critical. And then probably the last thing, which I learned it in the startup, you have to have thick skin as a fire chief, as any department head, any city, any government leader. If you're pushing to do the right thing, being progressive, you're going to make some people mad. Some people are going to object because maybe they want to be status quo. Maybe they're the lazy ones. They don't progress. Maybe they just enjoy the tradition of their organization and they don't like you changing the culture. And so people are going to say things about you. People are going to go online and bash you. They're going to lie about you. And it's very lonely at the top when you're being progressive like that. So you have to have thick skin, which is why I've got the Roosevelt speech up on my wall that says the man in the arena.
Ah, okay. I was wondering what that was, but I wasn't going to ask. But now that you pointed it out. Now, as to the firing and they may come back, even there, you can hope that teaches that person a lesson before they come back too. So you're helping them in the long run. Hopefully they don't take away from that. Screw you. I do what I want. Whatever. Hopefully they get something positive in them out of that going forward also.
For sure. And I've seen that. I can remember one individual where he definitely was straight and narrow, but the two challenges with that was, for one, the reason for termination was so egregious, he shouldn't have been a firefighter anymore. The second part was it kind of shows some of the membership that maybe didn't agree with me that I don't have the power to fire them. Like, hey, Chief Savacool might fire you, but don't worry, an appeal, so he doesn't have that much power over us. And so the fear of termination goes away a little bit when they see someone, well, look what he did, and he got a job back. That means I can do whatever I want. And I guess another aspect is, as a fire chief, you can't talk about disciplinary issues. You can't talk about any personnel issues. It's illegal. That's why I'm not going into any detail, even after I'm not working there. But the firefighters, they can talk about it all they want. They can tell a make-believe story about why they were fired and make me look like the bad guy. The community actually thought that I reinstated this person, and the community knew what this person did. So they thought I reinstated them. So now I've got people that lived on my street, like, why did you give so-and-so his job back? And I said, I didn't. He got it back under appeal. And so those aspects were a downside, but I also wasn't going to let that hold me back from doing the right thing either.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to wrap things up, I don't watch it, but I'm curious. There's a fairly new TV series, I think going into a second or third season. You may already know where they let a bunch of criminals out of prison to go fight fires. You know what series I can't think of the name, but do you watch any of those kind of things on TV, or it's like, no, I live it. Because I'm wondering how realistic it, letting people out of prison to fight fires is one thing, but like growing up I remember watching the Emergency show. I loved that, and Adam 12. Now, how realistic any of those things are, I'm curious whether you've got any input.
I haven't. I think I know the show you're talking about. It's about the California fire crews. In fact, Cal Fire, our state fire agency, I think sued because they said, "Hey, you have our patches on those uniforms, and we're not endorsing this show." And I'm paraphrasing. I'm not sure they actually sued, but I know they publicly said, "No, this isn't us." And that's been a long. There's been a long history of California using inmate crews to fight fires, and they don't grab anybody with kind of any violent offenses or anything like that. So. And they're called trustees, but they get people that they trust to be on a fire crew, and they know that's a good deal, and so they don't want to screw it up. So they're actually usually on their best behavior. I don't watch those shows because usually they're nowhere near reality. They're for dramatics. Like even the movie Backdraft, that wasn't real. You go into a house fire without a mask on, you're dead. Like there's no taking your mask off and getting through. Like if it's not fully involved, like if it's a bedroom fire, you might be able to get down low, but you're going to suck enough smoke where you're going to be hacking. But if it's fully involved, like they do in all these shows, and you go inside, you're dead because it goes in and basically destroys all the alveoli in your lungs. You're toast. So those aren't really realistic. I do remember a show back in the 90s, early 2000s called Third Watch. And I remember as a paramedic watching that thinking, okay, they have a paramedic on set telling them what drugs to administer and how to treat this person, because that one was pretty realistic. But other than that, I don't really watch them, partly because I'm kind of done and over with
it. Well, thank you, Clive Savacool, for coming on. Appreciate you stopping by. Take care. Best of luck in all your future endeavors.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been fun.
Thank you for having tuned in for ChristiTutionalist Politics show. If you haven't already, please check out my primary internationally available book, Terror Strikes, coming soon to a city near you. Available anywhere books are sold. If you have locally run bookstores still near you, they can order it for you, or autographed copies are available online direct from me via TerrorStrikes.info/shop. Be sure to check out more about today's discussion at thelibertybeacon.com, where my articles drop every Saturday. And let me remind, over time, the fancy high production items will come. But for now, for starters, it's just you as a very appreciated listener by me. All substance, no fluff. No fancy high production intro or inserts, at least yet, just straight to key discussion points. A show that looks at a variety of topics, mostly politics, through a Christian U.S. constitutionalist lens. So again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Take care. God bless. Like and subscribe to ChristiTutionalist Politics podcast and share episodes. We need your help to grow the show. Just wanted to give a brief shout out and thank you to all the folks on iHeartRadio and Player FM for being two in the top 3 platforms that my show, ChristiTutionalist Politics, is most often listened to.